Welcome everyone to the May edition of Northwest Indiana Green Drinks. I'm Em Racine. I'm the manager of communications and community engagement for Save the Dunes. Nancy unfortunately couldn't be with us tonight, so I'll be doing both the MC and Save the Dunes housekeeping aspects tonight. I'm your gracious host. So thanks so much for joining all of us. This video is being recorded both on Zoom and on Facebook Live, and we ask that everyone remain muted throughout the duration of the presentation, but feel free to drop any questions or comments or claps in the chat while the presentation is going on. If you're watching us on Facebook Live, feel free to drop any questions in the comments. We have a little bit of lag there, so we'll get to your questions all at the end. Today's presentation, we are welcoming Katie Hobgood, Program Director of Save the Dunes, to present on building a bird habitat at home, introducing a new native landscaping guide. As always, these events are co-sponsored by Save the Dunes and Michigan City Sustainability Commission, plus supported by the NWI Region Resilience. With guest host this month is Indiana Department of Natural Resources, the Indiana Dunes National Park, the Dunes Calumet Audubon Society, the Chicago Bird Alliance, Susan Kurt Photography, Valparaiso University, and the Nature Conservancy of Indiana. So without further ado, we will begin our presentation. The screen is all yours, Katie.
Thank you. Thanks so much for joining. Let me share my screen real quick. Alrighty. Can you see that okay? Okay, terrific. Hold on, let me make you guys smaller. Okay, there we go. Need to be able to actually see my screen. Wow, thank you again for joining to learn more about this really wonderful resource that Save the Dunes has developed. My name is Katie Hobgood. I'm the program director at Save the Dunes, and it was a true pleasure to be able to work on this project. And so I'm very excited to do a deep dive with you all today. There's a lot of information that is packed into the resource, so we're gonna look in depth at everything that we have included and how you can utilize it to add some more native plants to your yard. So let's dive in. First, let's see, there we go, okay. First, if you're not familiar, I would imagine most people are, but just in case, Save the Dunes is an environmental nonprofit. We were founded in 1952 to help protect the remaining untouched dunes on the southern tip of Lake Michigan. Eventually, we were successful in establishing the Indiana Dunes National Lakeshore in 1966. Which became the Indiana Dunes National Park in 2019. And we are now an official partner of the Indiana Dunes National Park. But we also work very collaboratively across the region with a lot of environmental organizations and agencies to protect and advocate for the Indiana Dunes, Lake Michigan, and surrounding natural areas. So we carry out our mission through our work in advocacy, conservation, and community engagement. And today we're talking about one program project in particular, but we have a lot going on. So our website is here at the bottom, savedunes.org. I invite you to go check it out to learn more about our organization and all the different programs that we are working on. So, Living in the Dunes. This is a guide series that we have been working on over the past 10 plus years. And the goal of these guides, at their core, they're landscaping guides. So they're meant to help you choose native plants to add to your landscape. Because we are based in Northwest Indiana, so Lake Porter and the Port counties of Northwest Indiana, and because our region is so fragmented, it really takes a community effort to create connectivity across our region. So if we can add more habitat in home gardens or at your workplace or your school or library or wherever you have control over the plants, that is going to help the biodiversity of our region in general. So that's kind of like the big picture goal of creating a resource like this. But each of our different volumes focuses in on a different topic. So volume one, that one talks about common invasive plant species that you can find in a residential setting. And then it shares native species that you can replace them with. And then volume two, which is our pollinator guide, this shares a lot of information about native pollinator species and how important they are to the ecosystems, the bio web to our survival as a species, but it has a lot of really, really interesting information about pollinators themselves, but then specifically the special relationships that those pollinators have with native plants. And so it helps you choose native plants that will specifically benefit pollinator species. And then volume three, which is what we're talking about mainly today. And when I was thinking about what was the new angle going to be. Uh, of course, birding is very popular in Northwest Indiana, and we'll talk more about why that is as we get into the guide. But that was definitely a no-brainer. Definitely a topic that people are very interested in and that we have a lot to say about in this region. So we will be diving into volume three, which we just completed earlier this year. So we released the guide in February of 2026. And before we dive in, I want to mention a little bit about who this guide is for, because we use language like dunes and coastal communities. And so I just want to clarify that we do not mean shoreline communities when we say coastal communities. The Lake Michigan watershed is technically a coastal community. We're all in a coastal community. So these guides were created for Lake Porter and LaPorte counties of Northwest Indiana. It doesn't have to be, a sandy dune in front of your house for these to be helpful for you. It's really meant to be helpful for the entire region. And if you know anything about native plants, generally their ranges are fairly wide. It depends on the plant, but like Midwest, there's a good chance that a plant is going to be native in a wider range than just our three counties. So if you're not in Lake Porter or LaPorte County of Northwest Indiana, there's still a good chance this will be helpful, but always recommend just doing a little bit of research. If you see a plant in one of these guides and you're not from one of our three counties, you can just quickly search it online to find the native range just to ensure that it is native to where you are. So let us dive in, shall we? Okay. All right, so I'm just going to take you through the different spreads of the guide. And then at the end, we will share how you can receive your digital copy. You can download it on your computer and your phone. We also have physical copies at our office, and Em will be sharing more about how you can get copies of those later. This is one of those things that I would recommend getting a physical copy. It's really beautiful, and it's something that I keep going back to and referencing and looking things up. And so I would recommend getting a physical copy. But anyhow, so we're going to go through each spread of the guide tonight, and I will show you kind of how it's laid out and where the information is that you should be looking for. Our first spread is, of course, starting with the acknowledgements. I've said many times that, this is something Save the Dunes has created, and I did this, but I did not do this. This was created in collaboration with an incredibly talented advisory committee. So this list of folks here, and you heard them mentioned as, the co-sponsors, I think, of the event as well. Like those are the groups that were represented in our advisory committee, and they helped provide the technical content for the guide, coming up with information on the birds that we highlight, on the plants that we highlight. They wrote side stories. They helped shape the themes and the layout in some cases for the guide. So I just want to give a huge thank you to the advisory committee who participated in this project. And then you can see the project team, the folks who actually made the document. And then, of course, our funders are listed at the bottom. which this would not be possible without the money to make it happen. So this document was created in part by a grant from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration and the Indiana Department of Natural Resources Lake Michigan Coastal Program, and we had matching support by BP. So I know we usually skip over acknowledgement page, but if you could just take a second, send some good vibes to these people because they took some time to create this really beautiful resource with us. I'm not going to read the introduction to you. Once you have your copy, you can read it. My hope was that it is engaging and inspires you to want to turn the page and learn more. So that's what we're going to do. Okay, so our next spread shows a couple of maps. And before I get into this, I just want to mention that in general, when we're thinking about birds in this guide, they're kind of in these two buckets where there's migratory birds and then there's residential birds. And so the migratory birds, they are in our region only certain parts of the year, and then they're elsewhere during different parts of the year. Whereas the residential birds, they are here year round. So you can see them all 12 months of the year. So we start by talking about our place on the migration route, because I think anywhere that you are in the world, building habitat is a positive thing, right? It's a good idea to add native plants to your yard, regardless of where you are. And that's going to benefit a plethora of species, and especially those residential birds who live in your yard, who rely on that habitat to survive. But in Northwest Indiana, we are in a really special location along one of the migration routes for birds. And so it's kind of this extra layer of, why should you do this? It's not just that it's, important for the species who live here, but there's also this opportunity to have an enormous impact on birds moving through the area during migration time. And there's so many birds moving through our area because of our position on the Mississippi Flyway, which is one of the migration routes that birds use to go north and south during spring and fall migration in North America. And so this map on the left, this is not the entirety of the Mississippi Flyway, it's just the parts that are kind of relevant to our area. But you can see here's our three counties, Lake County, Porter County, LaPorte County, and we're at the southern tip of Lake Michigan. And so birds, while they're migrating, and in general, generally don't like to fly over big open water because there's no place to land and rest, and there's like thermal things that are happening. So they are going to be hugging the shoreline of large bodies of water like Lake Michigan. And so right now we are in the spring migration. And so birds are moving north, and they're coming up, and there's like winds that are kind of pushing them this way a little bit. And so a lot of birds are making their way through our area, and then they hit the lake, and then they don't want to go over it. And so now they have to figure out how to get around it. So they end up spending some extra time in our area just trying to traverse, like, oh gosh, I don't want to fly over that. So I need to reroute myself, a little GPS reroute. So that is kind of the main reason why we have millions of birds migrating through our area during the spring and the fall migration. It's just we're in this really special place where they get funneled here. And then we have really terrific places like the Indiana Dunes National Park and the Indiana Dunes State Park and many other protected nature preserves and parks. And that's what we're showing over here on the right side with this kind of more zoomed in map, again, of our three counties. So all of the green dots, those are the protected areas. And so those are great places for birds to stop and refuel and find the resources that they need, because migration takes a lot of energy. And so they need a lot to refuel themselves to be able to carry on. And if it works out that they're able to stop at one of these really great protected areas, then great. But millions of birds are moving through our areas. And if they, didn't take the exact right route, they might not have the resources that they need to continue on their journey. And you can see in our area, though we do have some very important protected lands, we have a lot that is beige here, right? So the goal of this guide is to have your yard become another green dot on this map. So there's more opportunities for birds in general, but specifically migratory birds, to have a spot that they can safely stop and find the resources that they need in order to thrive and move and be successful in their journey. I think I probably said more words than are on this page, but that is the sentiment. It's a really cool story, so you can read more on this and check that out when you have your copy. Okay, so let's talk about birds. We start by highlighting 20 native bird species, and they are pretty evenly split between migratory species and residential species, but they are listed alphabetically by common name, though we also include, of course, the scientific name. And we're going to look more detailed at some of these flags to talk about the information, but I just want to point out that we also have these side stories throughout the guide. So we did a lot of brainstorming on what are those kind of interesting topics that we want to pepper in to either share more information or some tips, or in this case, a fun success story of how community conservation really paid off with the resurgence of eastern bluebird populations. So just want to note that those are really, really great pockets of information. I can't help myself. I will be talking about several of them, but also want to flag that we worked with the very talented Catherine Hugh from Sedges Have Edges Art, and she did the artwork for the guide, which adds really beautiful color and movement, and it's such a beautiful guide. I just love it so much. So anyhow, okay, so let's take a closer look at a couple of these flags to see everything that we have here, because this is really, I think, one of the most densely packed places. So first, as I mentioned, we have the scientific name and then the common name. Next, you're going to come to a flag that either says dimorphic or non-dimorphic. And so this is referring to sexual dimorphism. And that means when an animal, you just visually looking at it, you can tell if it's a male or a female, because there's some visual difference. That's sexual dimorphism. So for the birds in this guide, the ones that display sexual dimorphism, it's in their coloring. Their plumage is different from the male versus the female. So when it is a dimorphic bird, you will see that the top photo has this male symbol. And so this is a photo of the male of that species. And then the bottom photo has the female symbol. This is a photo of the female of that species. For a non-dimorphic bird, that means that you cannot tell just by looking at it if it's male or female. So the photos don't have that symbol, and it's just going to be two pictures of the bird in a different lighting or angle or what have you. Next, you're going to come to present in the region. So this is going to tell you if you're looking at a residential bird or a migratory bird. Well, there'll be a dot for each month that you can reasonably expect to see this bird in our region. And so the northern cardinal has a dot in all of them because this is a residential bird. They are here year round. Whereas the eastern phoebe, they are only here May through September. So they are a migratory species. And then we get into some kind of basic information like the size, the type of habitat that they typically inhabit, and that will help you think about where to look for them in your yard. They're not always going to be like right there. You can see them, maybe you're just hearing their call and you see that they are typically found in wooded areas, so you probably want to look in your trees to see where they are, that kind of thing. We list the type of food that they eat, how and where they build their nests, and then there's a fun fact for each bird, which might be my favorite part of the whole thing. They are very, very fun facts. So you can find some new bird trivia for your next dinner party. If people still have dinner parties, I don't know, but you will have some fun bird facts after you read this guide. And as I mentioned, so this is the next spread. We chose 20 birds, and so it continues on with more birds. This is one really important side story that is kind of one of the key themes for me that came out of this guide, of like thinking about the most impactful ways to create bird habitat and make choices that benefit birds. And you'll see once you start reading through the information on the birds in the food section, almost every single bird has insects listed because almost every single bird requires insects during some phase of their life, whether they're eating it themselves, but especially when they're raising young. Um, the the amount of insects and especially like caterpillars and soft-bodied insects that birds need to raise a clutch of young, it's in the thousands. They need an incredible amount of insects to raise their young. And so if your garden doesn't have insects, then you are not supporting birds. And so it's a little bit of a mindset shift for some folks, I think, where, we think of like insects on our plants are hurting our plants and I need to remove the infestation, but that's really what the birds need. They need the insects. So to garden for insects is to garden for birds. You can learn more in this side story. And then our last bird pages to finish up our 20, we have a side story about the detrimental impact of outdoor cats on bird populations. That's a controversial topic, but from a bird perspective, outdoor cats are a disaster. So we talk about that there. And then over on the right, we discuss the impact of like reflective surfaces and windows and have birds having strikes into windows, which is obviously very detrimental to them as well. So you can learn here about kind of why that happens and what you can do to prevent birds from striking your windows. And then finally, we have the light pollution section, where here we are in Northwest Indiana, and this is a map of light pollution. And many songbirds migrate at night because during the day they're resting or refueling, and at night there's fewer predators out. So they're flying at night, and when we have so much light on, it can be really disorienting and can mess with their navigation. And so, especially during migration season, light pollution is very problematic. So again, we talk a little bit about that here, and then what you can do to improve that situation in your yard. Okay, and then we come to the plants, because after all, this is a landscaping guide. So we want folks to add native plants to their yard to support birds. And this was a very difficult task because, again, we've listed 20 species here. And if you know native plants, there are so many native plants. So how do you get it down to 20? That is a very tricky thing. So some of the layers that we were considering were, number one, we wanted to include many different types of plants. And by that, I mean, like we have some tree species, we have shrubs, and then some additional things on the next page. In our first two versions of this landscaping guide, it was very focused on just like the wildflowers and some grasses. But in this one, we really wanted to dial in on that idea of adding layers to your garden, because that's the shrub layer and the tree layer, that's where the birds are going to hide, and that's where they're going to nest. And trees are really great for supporting insects, and so they're going to be feeding there as well. So thinking a little bit differently about kind of the structure of your garden, where it's not just like a patch of pollinator plants. Like that's great, you should have that, but then also adding in these additional layers is really what's going to be the most helpful for birds. So we wanted those kind of different variety of types of plants. We also wanted to select plants that you could actually get, that somebody locally sells, because there's plenty of really terrific plants, but if you can't buy them, then it's not all that helpful to recommend them. So we tried to choose species that you could get somewhere. And then we also tried to not duplicate species from the first two guides. So you can read this and then you can go read volume 2 and you'll have a whole new list of plant species to consider. So because there's so many native plants, there's so many wonderful native plants, and by and large, like any native plant you add to your garden is going to be better than a non-native plant, and certainly better than an invasive plant. Goodness. So you can't really go wrong with native plants, but we spend a lot of time thinking about really what are the specific benefits that each plant has for birds. And then we've highlighted that in our section, which these are pretty straightforward. So I didn't do my zoomed in flag thingy, but we talk about the size of the plant. And then we have a section on benefit to birds. So is it providing nesting habitat? Is it hosting a lot of insects, so that has that food source for the birds? Maybe it produces berries or seeds that they eat. Maybe the seed fluff is good nesting material. So there's a wide variety of ways that plants benefit birds, and we highlight those in the benefit to bird section. And then we included the type of birds that are generally attracted to that plant. If there's any interesting features or growing habits, some growing tips like the sun exposure, and then the bloom time for each one. So there's trees and shrubs. And before I go on to finish this thought, I just want to point out this side story, because this was such an interesting learning opportunity for me to be surrounded by so many like brilliant people and sharing their knowledge to make this guide so rich. I learned that blue jays are one of the most common dispersers of oak acorns, because they take them up to a mile away and then bury them and then, forget about some of them. And so you have oaks growing. And I always had it in my head that it was squirrels, but they tend to bury them a lot closer. And sometimes they're like caching them all in one place. And so they're not quite as effective. And look at this blue jay. This was like from a source photo of a blue jay doing this. It's just like the cutest thing that ever was. But in this side story, we also talk about how important oaks are. We didn't list it as one of our trees because we gave it its own side story, but oaks are one of the most important plant species that you can possibly add to your yard. So if you're choosing a tree and you don't have an oak and you have space for it, I would highly recommend adding an oak. And that's kind of what that side story talks about. But anyway, we'll move on. So we have trees, shrubs, and then sedges, grasses, and forbs. So this might be some new terms potentially. So let me define a couple of these. So you're probably familiar with grasses. A sedge, and I hope Nathaniel's not here because I'm not going to say this properly, but sedges look a lot like grasses, but it's technically a different type of plant. They're shaped differently. Sedges have edges, if you're familiar with the rhyme. So they're similar to grasses and they look similar, but they have different shapes. And then forbs, this is the technical term for plants like goldenrod and asters and bee balm, like flowering perennials or wildflowers, those kinds of things. The technical term for that is forb. So we decided to use that term. So this rounds out our 20 plants. And then we have another really terrific side story discussing if birds care about a plant being native versus non-native. Like if you think of a burning bush, which produces berries, and then the birds eat the berries, and then they go and poop the seeds out, and that's how burning bush spreads everywhere. But the birds are eating the berries, so like they don't really care that it's invasive, right? But the problem with that is that the nutritional value of those berries is very different than native berries. It's not producing the same amount of protein and fat. And so it's not as nutritious for the birds to have those berries. So you should take out your burning bush and put in a native shrub is kind of the conclusion of that side story. So spoiler alert, but it's still a great read on that one. So our next section, as this is a landscaping guide, we provided some planting layouts so that if you would like to just have here's a recipe to just follow this and put it in your garden and you're good to go. And I just want to go over a little bit the structure of this because it's a little bit different than our past two volumes. So over here, this is our sample house that we're looking at. And so you see the house with the two stepping stones in front. And then over here, you see the house with the two stepping stones. So this is the tree layer. Again, we're talking about layers in this garden. So first you have your tree layer, and then in the shrub layer, again, here's the house with the two stepping stones. And so now we're zoomed in a little bit, and under our trees, we're going to add in some shrubs. And then we zoom in again. Here's our house with our two stepping stones. And so here's where we're going to add in all our forbs and grasses and sedges. Now, the plants that we list, the ones that are numbered, these are the plants that are highlighted in the guide, those pages that we just looked at. And then we've also provided some alternative plants, just in case you cannot find our highlighted plants, or they're not going to work for your space for whatever reason. Here's some additional options that would also be good for creating bird habitat at home. And then our final pages, this is chock full of information, and I will try not to get on a soapbox here, because these are like all like the things that I love to talk about, just kind of those extra best practices and tips and tricks on really making your habitat impactful. That, you know, adding the native plants is a critical first step. And so we're hoping that this resource will help you do that, to choose native plants that you can add in. But then the way that you manage your garden is equally as important. So that's kind of what we're talking about on this spread here. So we start by covering the essential features of a bird garden, and these are the elements that create habitat. It's food, water, shelter, place to rear young. And so we kind of give some examples here of what that means for birds. And so you can read through these and think about how you can incorporate more of these spaces and elements into your garden space. And then some tips on, you know, like how to really dial into the major themes that we're covering in this guide, which I've already mentioned a couple of these, one focusing on the layering, and then this is that idea of gardening for insects, to make sure that you have a space where insects are thriving so that birds can, as a result, thrive. The middle one, I didn't mention, adding more water features to your yard, and especially water that's moving, is a great way to attract birds, because they can hear the water and so they'll come in to investigate. You just want to make sure that you're keeping everything clean and sanitized. You don't want to attract wildlife to unsanitary conditions. Speaking of which, responsible bird feeding is the next section. We are not anti-bird feeder, but just advocate that it is done in a way that is responsible, that if you have bird feeders, that you keep them clean. And I think I view them as a really terrific opportunity to build relationship, for people to be able to see the wildlife, you know, up close, and get great pictures of them. And I think it just builds that relationship, and the more that you know about something, the more that you care about something. And so I think there's really great value in that. And for, you know, children too, to get them into the hobby and be able to see wildlife up close, I think is a really special thing. So I am not against bird feeders, but I think the one caveat would be that when you're thinking about, like, I want to provide food for birds, like that is your goal, I would advocate that you don't stop at a bird feeder, that you are going beyond just having that and adding the native plants and adding the habitat elements that we talk about in this guide, because those are really what are going to sustain wildlife and bird in your yard, whereas the bird feeder is less sustainable, I guess. So we talk a little bit about that here. And then on the next page, we talk about garden cleanup and maintenance, and how, you know, leaving your garden a little bit messier than the traditional standard is pretty critical for birds. I cannot tell you how many birds I have seen this spring rooting around in my messy prairie planting and taking pieces of grass and little sticks and little stems and flying off with them to build their nest. They're taking my leaves and throwing them around to find insects in them. Like, my garden that I did not clean up that is where the birds are right now, because that's where they're finding the things that they need. So if you clean up your garden and have it at kind of this sterile place, then that is not supporting wildlife. I understand it's a certain aesthetic, and maybe there's places that you need to do that, but maybe there's not. Maybe consider that you can, start moving towards using leaves as natural mulch. That's what I do, and it makes really, really terrific soil. So my plants grow better, and I am lucky enough to have a maple tree. So my leaves are very beautiful. So it's very beautiful mulch, and it actually stays in place. So I could talk all day about that. But spring and garden cleanup is important, because if you're going to go through the trouble of creating habitat and adding in native plants and making this really wonderful place for pollinators and insects and birds to live and thrive, but then you just like take it all and throw it away or burn it twice a year, it's you're getting rid of the insects that are in those leaves. And okay, I'm going to stop. I'll get off my soapbox. We need to do a whole presentation on that, but yeah. And then we talk a little bit about some common garden chemicals and the impacts that they can have on birds. So things like fertilizers, which, well, you can read to learn about fertilizers, pesticides, mosquito fogging, rodenticides. So all of these have direct impact on bird populations. And so, thinking about your chemical use in the garden setting to ensure that you're making choices that are healthy for birds. And then finally, we have our resources section. So if you'd like to learn more, we've listed some resources, some garden certificate award opportunities, some local native plant sales that happen annually, as well as some garden centers where you can purchase native plants. And then we've also linked to volumes 1 and 2 of our guide. So if you need to get a hold of those, which I recommend that you do, you can find out how to get them. Okay, how am I doing on time? Am I doing okay? Okay, thank you. Then I'm going to keep going. So where to start? That was a lot of information. I think that once you get it, it is very approachable, because it's like you read whatever page you want, and then whatever level of detail you'd like to dive in, it's really up to you. So I just gave you like everything at once. So I just wanted to offer a couple of suggestions on like, where do you get started if you don't already have, a ton of gardens and you're not super familiar with native plants? Just a few practical tips on where I would suggest prioritizing your energy. So first, I would take a look at what you have and what is missing. So thinking, let me go back for a second. Can I go back? I would like to go back, please. Yes. So thinking about these essential features, this is what is required to create habitat. You need all 4 things. Okay. So food, water, shelter, place to rear young. Which of these do you already have, and what is missing? And then you can, focus on adding what is missing. And you can use the guide to do that, because we've given you all the information. I would highly recommend starting small, and focusing on, being realistic with what you can maintain, and focus on, getting those small wins so that you can get that dopamine rush and like, yes, that was good. That was easy. We were successful. Now I can add to it and I can grow to it, or I can grow it. But that's my my recommendation. I never do. I always take these huge projects and then it's my life. That's all I do in the summer is garden, and that's how I like it. So if that's you, I can relate, but I would recommend starting small. And then I would make a plan to remove your invasive species if you have them, which you probably do. Most yards do. I have them all over my yard. It's such a headache. But volume 1 of this guide series can help you ID them if you're not sure. There's also a lot of really knowledgeable people in our region who are here to support you if you need that. There's the the Porter LaPorte Advancing Natives team, which is the local SISMA for Porter County and LaPorte County that you can contact. I'm connected with them as well, as are several people on the call. But getting control of that, because once you start creating garden space and taking areas out of lawn and making them into garden where you're no longer mowing them, which is, the goal, right? That's what we want to do. But then there's nothing suppressing those invasive species. So like staying on top of that is pretty important. And then you can start implementing all of the kind of side tips that we talked about. So the spring and fall garden cleanup best practices, the how you're using chemicals, being a responsible bird feeder user, uh, improving habitat for insects. So there's like a lot of smaller things you can be doing while you're waiting for your native plants to grow. And then I think lastly, I just wanted to highlight where you can get native plants. We have several local native plant sales, and there are still, I think just one has passed maybe, and so there's still many opportunities for you to get native plants. There's a couple this weekend on Saturday, so you can see those dates and locations here. We will be at the Indiana Dunes Visitor Center during the Indiana Dunes Birding Festival next week. So if you are looking to get a physical copy of this guide, you can find us at the Visitor Center. And Dunes Calumet Audubon is having a native plant sale at the same location. So 2 birds, 1 scone, you got it all, May 14th through 17th. There are also some online sellers like Possibility Place and Prairie Moon Nursery. And there are a couple of local garden centers that I frequent. These are my 2 favorites. I know there are many that sell them, but these are the 2 that I get my plants from. Just want to be careful when you're going to kind of general garden centers to look out for cultivars and nativars. If you're not familiar, again, that's like a whole separate presentation, but a quick Google will give you more information than you could possibly want to know about cultivars, and ideally straight species are what we would be adding, but that's a story for another day. Oh, I do have one more slide. So if you would like to download a free copy of this resource, I'm gonna make sure that this box isn't blocking you because I feel like maybe it is. You can go to our website, which is savedunes.org, and then there's a resources tab up here on the top right, and it'll take you to our resources page. And then this guide is the first thing listed. If you are not on your phone right now, you can scan this QR code, and that will take you to it. And I think Em is also going to drop it in the chat, I guess, if we want to be easier about it. But I guess for those watching the recording, these are some good options for getting your copy. Okay, and then that is all that I have for you. Again, this was such a privilege to work on this project, to have something that's so beautiful and so helpful. And I hope that it is helpful for you, and that you are able to build some really wonderful habitat. I would love to hear about it if you do or see pictures. My email is here, so you're welcome to share fun stories about what you're working on. But yeah, I'm a gardener, and I am sort of obsessed with it. So I would love to talk to you about your garden, is the long and short of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. We do have a couple of questions, so we could get to those that are in the chat. If anyone does have any additional questions, either drop them in the chat or raise your hand and we'll get you unmuted. But Kathy said that this is such a beautiful guide and full of so much information. Would love to get physical copies. You have several options. So you can connect with Katie or I about picking up some at the Barker House here in Michigan City, where Save the Dunes is housed. That's probably the most direct point of contact to get them. But as Katie mentioned, Save the Dunes will be tabling at the Indiana Dunes Birding Festival, and we plan to bring plenty of copies. But if you'd like a bigger number of copies, just reach out to me, and I could drop my email in the chat too, and we can get you like a set number and put your organization name on there and make sure that they're designated for you if they're not flying off the shelves at Birding Fest. So feel free, Kathy, to shoot me an email with the number that you want, and if you want to come pick them up here or at Birding Fest next week. And then we had one other question on Facebook. Northwest Indiana is such a beautiful place. How do we continue to protect the areas around protected areas? So I think Katie talked a little bit about that with the fragmentation and why your backyards can make such a big impact. And the comment also made note around, development and data centers and the things that are coming that may be threatening our protected areas. So as always, stay involved, call your reps, do what you can to stay involved at the municipal level to make your voice known that these areas are worth protecting and that these developments are making impacts to these places. And so we'll use our voice. If anyone else has comments or questions, all right, Terry. Oh, did you keep your hand raised up if you want to come off mute for a question? Let's see if I'm able to. Okay, go ahead, Terry. Should be able to come off mute. Go
Yeah, I
ahead.
think you hear me. Can you hear me now? Yeah, I just wanted to let you know that we had a student from Purdue University do some great landscape architecture work out at the old state line generating, and I sent you some copies of that. I hope you had a chance to download it, look at it. But it's an effort to actually take a brown field and green it up and make it where we can have some public access and some green beauty on the lakefront there. So whatever you can do to spread that around, uh, uh, you know, let people know what's going on there, and we need to encourage some further development of that area for sure. And Kathy Perrin was instrumental in doing a lot of work over there too on that project, working with the group. So I think it's a good example to where we can take a data center and make sure that we have some green space around those areas. And I think something we're all going to have to get serious about is even whether it's development of warehouses, subdivisions, or whatever out in these cornfields, there's going to have to be an ordinance to where they have a basically a migratory green space area so that we don't destroy, the migratory situation for the birds, the bees, the butterflies, and the wildlife. So keep that in mind when everybody in their community is making those demands to your local government to make sure those are in the ordinances and they're part of the development plan. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Terry. All right, anybody else? Or we can move on to some announcements and other updates. But again, feel free to leave things in the chat if something comes up to you while we're doing announcements. So as always, I don't know if I mentioned this in the intro that all of our green drinks are recorded and go on to live on our Save the Dunes YouTube page. So if you really enjoyed tonight's presentation or missed a previous green drinks, those are always available on our YouTube. I just dropped that link in the chat there. Kathy did share a flyer for a native planting event this Saturday. It is called Plant Smart. Do your part, plant smart, and it is a native planting workshop with Kathy and Leslie Shad, who presented on March Green Drinks. And so whatever you learned there in that green drinks, you can put into action at the workshop on Saturday. And that's at the Michigan City Senior Center from 1 to 2:30. I will also be there getting my hands dirty in the native plants too. And then in terms of Save the Dunes updates, and we already mentioned we're going to be at Birding Fest. The other upcoming events for Save the Dunes, I'll be leading a market walk and talk on Saturday, May 23rd we'll meet at the 11th Street South Shoreline Station in Michigan City and walk and talk together over to the farmers market. It's the opening day. This project is a part of the NWI Thrive event to encourage people to commute to and from the train stations to local businesses and local happenings. So we'll all be hanging out there, and the first 20 people who register will receive a little treat bag with $5 market money to spend at the market while we're there. And we'll talk more about connectivity and green spaces at that event. And then on the 27th, I will be hosting our quarterly Barker Seasonal Forum. If this was just a little teaser of this landscaping guide, not gonna want to miss Barker Seasonal Forum when we're gonna do a deep dive into all three guides. Very similar to how Katie went through guide number 3, but we'll cover guide 1, 2, and 3. Another opportunity to pick up copies if you like those. And that is on Wednesday, May 27th, from starting at 4:30 with a hike around Barker Woods here at the Barker House. And then last but not least, we'll end out the month with our Dunes Dash 5K. So it is our annual spring fundraiser. It is a 5K through the beautiful West Beach. You don't have to run it. You don't have to go for your best time, but it's a great time to get out, support Save the Dunes, and run for a good cause. So that is on Saturday, May 30th. And all of that information from all those events are available on our website. I'll drop that one in the chat too so that you can find all of those. Some are RSVP, some are ticketed. So check them out. And I hope to see you out in the dunes at one of our events. And that's all my updates. It looks like lots of people are dropping other cool events and flyers and happenings in the chat as well. So before we say goodnight, please check those out. Save any of those that look interesting to you. Lots of plant swaps and plant sales and gorgeous garden photos. So not to be not to be missed. All right. And with that, we will end our May green drinks and we'll see you in June. As always, the first Thursday of the month. So I believe that's the 7th again next month. No, actually the 4th. June 4th will be our June green drinks. And then we take our customary break for July. So we hope to see you all next month. And as always, take care. Bye, guys.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.